Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I moved in with this guy about 6 months after graduating college. I came home from work one day and went straight to the fridge because I've been thinking about that leftover Chinese food all day. The container was there, but when I opened it, there was maybe a quarter of what I'd saved. I stood there staring at it for a solid minute, trying to remember if I'd somehow eaten more than I thought. But no, I distinctly remembered portioning it out so I'd have lunch for the next day. My roommate was in the living room watching television. I asked him if he'd eaten some of my Chinese food. He admitted he had, saying he was starving when he got home. He told me he'd replace it. He said it so casually, like he'd borrowed a pen. I waited for him to replace it. He never did. Then it was my orange juice. I'd spent $12 on the good stuff, the kind with pulp and no added sugar. Half of it vanished in 2 days. Then my sandwich stuff disappeared. The deli turkey I bought for the week was gone by Wednesday. Then the fancy coffee I treated myself to after a rough week at work. That one cost me $18 and I'd had maybe 2 cups before it was empty. Every single time I bring it up, he'd apologize and promise to replace things or stop taking them. Every single time, nothing changed. I started labeling my food with my name in big letters. Didn't matter. I tried having a serious sit-down conversation about respecting boundaries. I told him I needed him to stop eating my food. I explained I was on a tight budget and planned out my meals for the entire week. I even showed him my meal prep containers and my grocery list to make it clear how much planning went into this. He agreed completely, admitted it was his fault, and promised it wouldn't happen again. It happened again and again. I started keeping a mental tally of everything that went missing. A container of hummus I'd bought 3 days before. A pack of string cheese that was supposed to last me 2 weeks. My protein bars that cost $25 for a box of 12. I'd had 3 and suddenly there were only 5 left. The final straw was when my meal prep for the entire week disappeared. I'd spent my whole Sunday afternoon cooking chicken, rice, and vegetables. 5 containers perfectly portioned out. By Wednesday, 3 of them were gone. I thought about just getting a mini fridge for my room, but that felt like admitting defeat. Plus, why should I have to spend extra money because this guy couldn't keep his hands off things that didn't belong to him? The more I thought about it, the angrier I got. I was paying for groceries I wasn't even eating. I was skipping meals because the food I planned on was gone. I was spending money I didn't have, replacing things that shouldn't have needed replacing. That's when I decided enough was enough. I waited until a weekend when I knew he'd be home. On Friday night, I started phase 1 of my plan. I made sure to look miserable when he was around, coughing a little, moving slowly, acting like I had some kind of bug. I even skipped going out with friends and stayed in both nights, really selling the sick act. I made a point of blowing my nose loudly whenever he was nearby. I left used tissues on the coffee table. I coughed without covering my mouth a few times when he walked past. Saturday morning, I shuffled into the kitchen in my pajamas, looking as gross as possible. My roommate was at the table on his laptop. Perfect! I grabbed the orange juice container from the fridge, the one I'd just bought 2 days ago that was already half empty. I tilted my head back and drank straight from the container, making sure to be as obvious about it as possible. I even wiped my mouth with the back of my hand when I was done and put it right back in the fridge. He looked up but didn't say anything. I could see him watching me out of the corner of his eye, though. Later that afternoon, I went for the pickles. I loved pickles, and this jar was nearly full when I'd bought it last week. Now it was 2/3 gone. I fished one out with my fingers, took a bite, and then before screwing the lid back on, I made sure some pickle juice dripped on the edge. I licked it off the rim of the jar, slow and deliberate. My roommate was walking past the kitchen right at that moment. I saw him stop and stare, but he kept walking. His face had this weird expression, like he wasn't sure if he'd really seen what he thought he saw. Around 4 p.m. I made myself a snack. I grabbed the bag of chips from the pantry, the one that had been full when I bought it and was now half empty. I ate them straight from the bag, then licked my fingers and stuck my hand back in for more. When I was done, I folded the bag and put it back without washing my hands. Sunday morning was the peanut butter. I made myself toast, and instead of using a knife, I stuck my finger right in the jar, scooped out a glob, and spread it on my bread. Then I licked my finger clean and went back for more. My roommate was getting coffee and I could feel him watching me. I made sure to cough a few times while I was doing it. I even scratched my nose with the same finger before dipping it back in the jar. The final straw was the cream cheese. I was making a bagel for lunch and he was microwaving something. I opened the cream cheese container and used my bare finger to scoop it out and smear it on both halves of my bagel. I even went back for seconds, double dipping without shame. I made sure he saw me wipe some cream cheese off my chin and then use that same finger to get more from the container. That's when he cracked. He asked me if I always handled food like that. I turned to look at him, trying to keep my expression neutral. I asked him what he meant. He clarified, asking if I always stuck my fingers in everything and drank from containers. I shrugged. I told him I did and asked why I would dirty a bunch of utensils when I was the only one eating my food. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. He repeated my words back to me, asking if I really was the only one eating my food. I said I was. I explained it was my food that I bought, so obviously I was the only one eating it. I asked him if someone else had been eating my food without asking. He went pale. I took a big bite of my bagel and walked back to my room, leaving him standing there in the kitchen. I didn't hear from him for the rest of the day. Monday morning, I found him in the kitchen before work. He looked like he hadn't slept well. He told me he'd been thinking and suggested we should each have our own designated areas in the fridge, like specific shelves and drawers. He said it would prevent any confusion about whose food was whose. I pretended to consider this. I agreed it made sense and told him it was a good idea. He asked if maybe we could do the same in the pantry. I said sure, that sounded good. We spent 20 minutes dividing everything up. He was very careful about which items went where, double and triple checking that he wasn't accidentally claiming anything of mine. He even suggested we put labels on our respective shelves so there would be no mistakes. I noticed he kept staring at the orange juice container while we organized things. From that day forward, my food stopped disappearing. In fact, he seemed to go out of his way to avoid even looking at my shelves in the fridge. He started buying duplicates of things we both used just to make sure he never accidentally touched mine. 2 jars of peanut butter in the pantry, 2 containers of cream cheese in the fridge, 2 bottles of orange juice clearly separated on different shelves. Sometimes I catch him staring at the orange juice container with this haunted expression before grabbing his own drinks. A few weeks later, I noticed he'd started buying pre-packaged, individual servings of everything. Single-serve yogurt cups instead of the big container. Individual bags of chips instead of the family size. Personal-sized bottles of juice instead of the big ones. I eventually stopped my disgusting food handling habits, but he didn't need to know that, and I never once saw him touch my food again, not even by accident. I graduated high school with a 4.0 grade point average, top of my class. My parents were proud, and honestly, I was too. All those late nights studying instead of working fast food jobs like my friends seemed worth it when I walked across that stage as valedictorian. My grandmother on my dad's side came to the ceremony. Afterward, she pulled me aside and handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $7,000. I just stared at it. She told me the money was for college and that she wanted me to start off right. I didn't know what to say except thank you. She said I'd earned it and told me to make her proud. I tried to deposit it the next day, but there was a problem. I didn't have my own bank account. My parents never let me work during high school because they wanted me focused on academics, which meant I never needed one. Whenever I got birthday money or graduation checks from relatives, my mom would take them and deposit them into what she called my savings account. It was joined with both our names on it, but she assured me it was mine. She told me to just give her the check and that she put it with the rest of my money. I asked if she was sure since it was a lot. She insisted it was safer this way and that I didn't need to worry about it. So I handed it over. A year passed. I was 19 and getting ready for my second year of college. I decided it was time to open a checking account so I could pay for things myself without always asking my mom for money. She came with me to the bank. The employee pulled up my information and started setting up the new account. My mom leaned forward and suggested we keep the savings account joint like it was now so that she could help me if I needed it. The employee looked at me. I shrugged. It seemed fine at the time. The employee said that worked for her and that she'd just add the checking account to my profile. Before we left, I asked to see the balance on the savings account. The employee turned the screen toward me. $1,000. I felt my stomach drop. I asked my mom where the rest was. She said she'd had to borrow some here and there and that she'd pay me back. I pointed out that there should be way more than this. She told me not to worry about it and repeated that she'd pay me back. I didn't push it. I should have. A few months later, my car died. I drove a beat-up 1999 Mercury Grand Marquis that had been on its last legs for years. When it finally gave out for good, my mom's side of the family wouldn't let it go. My grandparents on her side, who I called Granny and Pops, and my mom herself kept insisting I needed a new car immediately. I didn't want the debt, but they wore me down. My mom insisted I couldn't get to school without a car and promised they'd help with payments. Granny told me they'd put money down and not to worry so much. The monthly payments ended up being $900. My grandmother and dad gave me $7,500 to help cover it. Granny and Pops put $3,000 down. I figured with that much help, I could manage. This month, Granny called me and said the money from my dad's side was gone. She explained I was going to need to start paying the full amount. I asked if she meant the full $900. She confirmed it was $900 every month. I've been applying everywhere, every job board I could find. I got interviews, but nobody wanted to hire someone with zero work experience. I've been doing food delivery apps to scrape together what I could, but it wasn't nearly enough. Then my financial aid refund came through. $2,000. Finally, something. I had plans. My partner and I had been together for 2 years, and I wanted to make this Valentine's Day special. I set aside money for daily expenses and planned to transfer more for the date. Not a fortune, just enough to do something nice. $200 to start. I went to transfer it from my account. That's when I saw my mom had already taken it. I called her immediately. I asked her where my refund money was. She said she'd moved it and that the money needed to go toward the car. I told her I needed some of it and that I'd already transferred $200 for expenses. She asked me what I'd done and reminded me she'd told me not to touch that money. I argued it was my refund and that I needed it. She said I clearly couldn't be trusted with my own money and that this was exactly why she had to control it. I asked if she was seriously saying control. She said her word was final and added that since I decided to move in with my father like an ungrateful brat, I could pay the full $900 a month myself. I hung up and checked my account again. She'd taken everything except $50. Everything. I sat there staring at my phone, feeling completely powerless. That's when I decided I was done. I drove to a different bank the next morning. I walked in and asked to speak with someone about opening a new account. The representative was kind and patient. She explained that since I was over 18, I could open an account that was entirely mine. No joint ownership, no one else's name on it. She asked if there was a specific reason I was opening a new account. I told her I needed one that only I could access. She didn't ask questions after that. Within 30 minutes, I had a new checking and savings account. I transferred the $50 my mom had left me and set up direct deposit for any future refunds or income. When I got home, my phone was blowing up. My mom had gotten a notification about the new account. She called me 6 times before I answered. She demanded to know what I'd done. I told her I'd opened my own account. She said I already had an account. I said I had an account she controlled and emphasized the past tense. She said I was being ridiculous and acting like a child. I told her I was being an adult, and that was the problem. She started yelling about disrespect and how I'd regret this. I let her finish, then said one more thing before hanging up. I told her that I checked with the bank and discovered that of the $7,000 from grandmother 2 years ago, she'd taken $6,000 of it. I said she wasn't borrowing, she was stealing. I hung up before she could respond. My dad helped me find a job 2 weeks later through a connection at his work. I started saving again, this time in an account only I could touch. My mom tried to guilt me for months, but I never budged. And Valentine's Day, I took my partner somewhere simple but meaningful. We had a great time. It didn't cost $200, but it was perfect. My husband and I had been planning this trip for over a year. We saved up, took time off work, and finally got to spend a whole month traveling through Europe. It was supposed to be the trip of a lifetime, and honestly, it was amazing while it lasted. But we needed someone to watch the house while we were gone, make sure the plants didn't die, collect the mail, that sort of thing. My sister seemed like the obvious choice. She'd been going through a rough patch, had just broken up with her boyfriend of 3 years, and was living in a tiny studio apartment that she hated. When I offered to let her stay at our place for the month, she jumped at the chance. She said it would be good for her to get away from her usual routine, clear her head, have some space. I thought I was doing her a favor. The trip was incredible. We spent weeks exploring different cities, trying new foods, seeing all the things we'd only ever looked at in pictures. My husband kept joking that we should just never go home. And honestly, part of me didn't want to. But eventually our money ran out and our jobs were waiting, so we flew back, exhausted but happy. When we got home, my sister was still there, not just there but really settled in. Her stuff was everywhere, clothes in our closet, toiletries all over the bathroom, her food taking up most of the fridge. I tried not to let it bother me. We'd been gone a month after all. She probably just got comfortable. Days went by. 3 days, then 4, then 5. She wasn't packing, wasn't even mentioning leaving. My husband and I kept exchanging looks, waiting for her to bring it up. Finally, after a full week, I couldn't take it anymore. I found her in the living room watching television like she owned the place. I asked her if she was planning to head back to her apartment soon. She didn't even look at me. She told me she needed more time. When I asked her more time for what, she said she needed to figure things out. She couldn't just go back to that depressing studio. She needed at least another week. My husband came into the room then. He'd overheard everything. He pointed out that we'd already been back a week. She knew that, she said. She appreciated us letting her stay. Just one more week was all she needed. I should have said no right then. Should have put my foot down. But she's my sister, and I didn't want to cause a fight. So we agreed. One more week. The next day, my husband and I both had to go back to work. It felt weird leaving her alone in the house, but what choice did we have? We couldn't just skip work. We left that morning, both of us dragging after the long trip and jet lag, still messing with our sleep. Work was brutal. 8 hours of catching up on emails and meetings about projects I'd completely forgotten existed. My husband texted me around lunch saying his day was just as bad. We were both exhausted by the time we headed home. That's when things got insane. We pulled into the driveway and I immediately noticed something was off. I couldn't quite place it at first. Then my husband tried his key in the front door. It didn't work. He asked me what was going on, confused. He tried again. Nothing. The key went in but wouldn't turn. I asked him if he grabbed the wrong key. He insisted it was definitely the right one. We stood there for a minute, completely lost. Then I pulled out my phone and called my sister. It rang and rang. No answer. I called again. Still nothing. My husband said she must have changed the locks. I told him she wouldn't do that. That would be crazy. But he pointed out that the key didn't work, so what else could it be? I felt this cold anger starting to build in my chest. I called her again. Nothing. Then I heard movement inside the house. She was in there. She was deliberately not answering. My husband announced he was calling a locksmith. He pulled up a number on his phone and started dialing. I heard him explaining the situation to someone on the other end, that we were locked out of our own house, that we needed someone to come change the locks back. That's when the front door flew open. My sister came charging out and I swear to God, she had one of our kitchen knives in her hand. A big one. She was waving it at my husband, screaming at the top of her lungs. She told him to get out of there. She yelled that this was her house now and demanded that he stay away. My husband stumbled backward, nearly falling off the porch steps. I grabbed his arm, pulling him further back. She was still coming at us, knife raised. her face twisted into something I didn't recognize. My husband asked her if she was insane. She screamed that she wasn't leaving, that we couldn't make her leave. She kept yelling at us to get out. We backed all the way to the sidewalk. Neighbors were starting to come out of their houses staring at the scene. Mrs. Patterson from next door had her phone out. I realized my hands were shaking. I told my husband we needed to call the police. He said he was already on it. He'd hung up with a locksmith and was dialing. I heard him talking to the operator, his voice surprisingly steady considering a knife had just been waved in his face. He explained where we were, what was happening, that we were the homeowners and someone had locked us out and threatened us with a weapon. My sister had gone back inside and slammed the door. I could see her shadow moving past the windows. The police showed up fast. 2 cars at first, then more. My husband pulled up the property deed on his phone, showed them the mortgage documents, everything proving this was our house. Mrs. Patterson and Mr. Chen from across the street both came over to confirm we were the owners, that they'd seen us living here for years. One of the officers tried knocking on the door. He called out to my sister, telling her she needed to come out. He told her to put down any weapons and come out with her hands visible. Nothing. More silence. Then they tried calling through a megaphone. Still nothing. That's when they called in the SWAT team. I watched from behind a police car as they surrounded the house. They used tear gas. I saw it seeping out from under the doors and windows. It took 20 minutes before she finally stumbled out, coughing, her eyes streaming. They put her in handcuffs right there on my front lawn. She was screaming the whole time they loaded her into the car. She kept yelling that this wasn't fair, that she needed that house, that we weren't using it. The officers found the knife just inside the front door. Since then, it's been a nightmare. My parents called, crying, asking how I could do this to my own sister. My brother called me selfish. Cousins I haven't talked to in years suddenly have opinions about family loyalty. My phone hasn't stopped ringing. My husband and I are working with a lawyer now, trying to figure out what charges she's facing. Trespassing for sure. Assault with a deadly weapon probably. The district attorney mentioned something about attempted home invasion. We finally got back into our house yesterday. She'd changed everything, rearranged furniture, thrown out some of our stuff, even painted one of the bedrooms, like she really thought she was just going to take over our lives. I keep replaying that moment when she came at us with the knife. My own sister, someone I grew up with, shared a room with for 15 years. I don't even recognize her anymore. I've been doing mountain rescue work for 6 years now. I was at home that evening when the call came through around 6:30. 2 young men, early 20s from what dispatch told me, were stranded somewhere on the ridge. The weather was absolutely brutal. Winds were gusting at 50 miles per hour, horizontal rain, visibility down to about 10 meters, and the temperature had dropped to just above freezing. The kind of night where you wouldn't send your worst enemy out there, but that's exactly where we were heading. We assembled the team quickly, 12 of us in total, all volunteers who'd left our warm homes and families to go searching for these 2. I remember thinking when we loaded the equipment that this had better be a genuine emergency. We get too many calls from people who just make poor decisions and expect us to bail them out. The search took 7 hours. 7 hours of trudging through freezing rain and howling wind, calling out into the darkness, sweeping our torches across the rocky terrain. We found them eventually huddled behind a boulder about 2/3 of the way up the ridge. They were soaked through, shivering, clearly in the early stages of hypothermia. No proper gear, no emergency supplies, just day packs with some water bottles and crisp packets. My colleague checked them over while I radioed our position. He told them they were lucky we found them when we did, saying another hour out here and we'd be looking at a very different situation. The first one thanked us repeatedly, saying they didn't think it would get this bad. I asked them if they hadn't checked the weather forecast before coming up here. The second one admitted they had checked, but it didn't seem that serious. I bit my tongue. We had weather warnings plastered everywhere, red alerts, advice to avoid the mountains entirely. But here we were, we got them down safely, which took another 2 hours. By the time we reached the base, it was past 2 in the morning. The two of them were still shivering despite the thermal blankets we'd wrapped them in. Their tent, which they'd pitched near the base before their walk, had partially collapsed in the wind. Everything inside was soaked. Our team leader told them they needed somewhere warm to stay tonight and said he'd make some calls. He managed to reach the owner of a small hotel about 3 miles away. I could hear the conversation from where I was packing equipment. He apologized for calling so late and explained we'd just brought 2 walkers down who needed somewhere to stay because their tent wasn't usable and they were hypothermic. The hotel owner agreed immediately. Not only that, but when we drove them over and explained the full situation, she offered them a 35% discount on the room rate. She brought them hot tea, made them sandwiches despite the kitchen being closed hours ago, and promised them a full breakfast in the morning. She told them not to worry about payment that night, saying they looked exhausted and could just settle up in the morning before leaving. The first one said that all their money was back in the tent. He explained everything got soaked and they couldn't grab their wallets when they realized they were in trouble. She said that wasn't a problem at all and they could send the money when they got home. She told them she trusted them. The second one agreed immediately, saying they'd send it as soon as they got back and got sorted. He thanked her repeatedly. She asked them to give her their phone number so she could text them her bank details. They gave her a number, thanked her profusely, thanked us profusely, and that was that. We headed home at nearly 4 in the morning, exhausted, cold, and looking forward to our own beds. 2 days later, the hotel owner called our team leader. The hikers had checked out early before breakfast, leaving a note saying they'd send the money. She'd texted the bank details to the number they gave her. The message bounced back. The number didn't exist. She waited a week, then 2 weeks. She tried calling multiple times. Nothing. They'd given her a fake number. Our team leader was furious when he told us. We all were. This woman had opened her home in the middle of the night, fed them, gave them warm beds, charged them less than half the normal rate, and they'd repaid her kindness by essentially stealing from her. He posted about it on our social media, keeping their identities private but making it clear what had happened. The post went viral. Local news picked it up. National news picked it up. Thousands of people were sharing it, commenting about how disgraceful their behavior was. In the statement our team leader posted, he explained that this rescue was entirely avoidable and the weather warnings were clear. He wrote that these 2 individuals put themselves in danger through poor planning and poor decision-making, then put our volunteer team at risk during a 7-hour rescue in terrible conditions. He added that a local hotel owner showed them incredible kindness at unsociable hours, and they had repaid this by disappearing without payment or even a thank you. The backlash was immediate and intense. People were offering to cover the hotel bill themselves. The hotel owner declined, saying that wasn't the point. The point was the principle of it. 3 weeks went by. Nothing. Those 2 had completely vanished, probably hoping everyone would forget about it. Then someone recognized them from the description in one of the articles. Turns out they'd been posting photos on social media from their camping trip, including ones with timestamps from the day of the rescue, bragging about their adventure. People found their profiles, their employers found their profiles, their families found their profiles. One of them had been let go from his job at an outdoor equipment shop. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The other one's university caught wind of it and launched an investigation into his conduct. The hotel owner eventually received her payment, plus a groveling apology and a substantial additional amount. But she donated the extra to our mountain rescue team. We still talk about those 2 sometimes when we're doing training exercises or heading out on a call. They've become the perfect example of everything wrong with a certain type of person who uses the mountains. Entitled, unprepared, and utterly lacking in basic gratitude or decency. I'm a 38-year-old structural engineer. I've been doing this for 10 years now, and my job is pretty straightforward. Make sure buildings don't collapse and kill people. That means following strict building codes, running calculations until my eyes blur, and refusing to cut corners no matter who's asking. Safety isn't negotiable in my line of work. 6 months ago, I was leading the structural design for a 15-story office building in a seismic zone. The client was a wealthy developer who made it clear from our very first meeting that he only cared about two things: cutting costs and speeding up construction. Every conversation with him felt like a battle where he'd push for cheaper materials or faster timelines, and I'd have to explain why that was impossible without compromising safety. But I've dealt with demanding clients before. I knew how to stand firm while staying professional. I thought I could manage him. The breaking point came during a project meeting about 3 months into the design phase. We were reviewing the foundation plans when he suddenly decided he wanted to make changes. He announced that he'd been looking at the numbers and thought we could reduce the thickness of the foundation slabs by 20%. I told him that wasn't possible because we were in a seismic zone, and the soil report showed we needed this thickness to handle the loads safely. He dismissed my concerns entirely. He said he didn't care what the report said, and that 20% less concrete meant saving time and money. He demanded I make it work. I pulled up the calculations on my laptop and walked him through the numbers. I explained how reducing the foundation thickness would violate building codes and put the entire structure at serious risk if an earthquake hit. I showed him the soil analysis, the seismic activity data for the area, everything that backed up my design decisions. He stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. He told me I was being dramatic. He claimed he'd built dozens of buildings and never had a problem. He accused me of overthinking the whole thing. I pushed back and said I wasn't overthinking anything. I explained that these calculations were based on engineering principles and legal requirements. I told him that if I signed off on a design that didn't meet code, I could lose my license. More importantly, people could die. That's when he lost it. He slammed his hand on the conference table hard enough to make everyone in the room jump. His face turned red, and he started yelling about how I was wasting his time and costing him money. Then he said something I'll never forget. He told me this was exactly why he hated working with women engineers. He said we were all overly cautious and emotional. He claimed that real engineers knew how to bend the rules when it made sense. I felt my stomach drop. The other people in the room, including 2 junior engineers from my firm and his project manager, all went silent. Nobody knew where to look. I told him I wasn't being emotional. I said I was following the law and doing my job. I made it clear that if he wanted to bend the rules, he'd need to find another engineer to sign off on it, because I wouldn't. He mocked me and said I was talking like a baby who couldn't handle a little pressure. He told me to grow up and said this was business. I was shaking, but I kept my voice steady. I repeated that this wasn't about pressure or business. I said this was about safety. I told him I would not approve a design that puts lives at risk, and I wouldn't risk my professional license for his profit margin. He leaned back in his chair and laughed. Actually laughed. He asked if I really thought anyone cared about my license. He said he'd just find someone else who knew how to actually get things done. I suggested he'd do exactly that because my answer wasn't changing. The argument went on for another 45 minutes. He kept yelling, accusing me of being incompetent and inflexible. He threatened to fire me and find another firm. He said I was personally responsible for costing him hundreds of thousands of dollars. I repeated the same points over and over. The design meets code, it's safe, and I will not compromise on that. By the time the meeting ended, I was physically shaking. I'd never been in a situation like that before. I went back to my office, closed the door, and just sat there trying to process what had happened. But it didn't end there. Over the next 2 weeks, he started a full-scale smear campaign against me. He sent emails to my bosses claiming I was unstable and unprofessional. He called me incompetent in messages to the city planning department. He even tried to pull strings with people he knew in local government, claiming our designs were over-engineered and unnecessarily expensive. He was trying to ruin my reputation and get me removed from the project. My firm held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I was terrified they'd cave to the pressure and replace me just to keep the client happy. But when I walked into that conference room, my boss looked me straight in the eye and said something I'll never forget. My boss told me they'd reviewed everything. She said my designs were perfect and met every code requirement. She said they were exactly what this building needed. Then she told me they were dropping him as a client. I almost cried with relief. My firm sent him a formal letter ending our contract and citing his hostile behavior and unreasonable demands. He threatened to sue us for breach of contract, but his lawyer must have told him he didn't have a case because we never heard anything after that. We had documented everything, every email, every meeting, every calculation. But even though I was proven right, the damage was done. I started having panic attacks. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning replaying the argument in my head, wondering if I should have handled it differently. I second-guessed every decision I made on other projects. I kept thinking about what he'd said about women engineers, and I started wondering if other clients thought the same thing but just didn't say it out loud. I love my job. I've dedicated my entire career to protecting people by designing safe structures, but one entitled man with too much money and zero respect for safety almost made me walk away from it all. He's probably out there right now working with some other engineer who was willing to bend the rules. And someday, if an earthquake hits, people might pay the price for his greed. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.